of the United States.
Those 9 words always mark the entrance of the President of the United States for the annual State of the Union address. It's a tradition dating back to the nation's very first president, George Washington. And in just a matter of hours, President Barack Obama will deliver this year's speech to a joint session of Congress. Millions of Americans will be watching on TV, making this his largest audience of the year. CCTV White House correspondent Jessica Stone joins us live from inside the Capitol building with what to expect. Jessica.
And Elaine, as you mentioned, we're just now 2 hours away from the president making this major address that basically kicks off his 2014 agenda. We expect that he will really go on the offensive, desiring to make this a year of action after essentially a lost legislative year in 2013. The first headline we expect to hear in this speech, an emphasis on increasing the minimum wage and an effort to do so on his own without congressional help for federal contractors. This would be a raise from about $7 an hour to $10.10 an hour, a significant raise, about 40%. He'll do that by executive action and then encourage Congress to work with him to do it for the American people at the same rate. We're also expecting that he will make a big push to extend unemployment insurance, and we know that the White House has been working on eliciting a pledge from many major employers like AT&T, Xerox, Procter & Gamble to make sure that they don't discriminate against anyone who has been long-term unemployed. Let me put up for you now an excerpt of the president's speech that we received in just the past hour, where he focuses on income inequality. Income inequality has deepened, he will say. Upward mobility has stalled. The cold hard fact, he says, is that even in the midst of recovery, too many Americans are working more than ever just to get by, let alone get ahead, and too many are still working at all. Elaine?
President Obama, as you mentioned, has been talking about things like increasing the minimum wage for a while now, but how will he just mandate it overnight?
Well, he really can't, but as we mentioned at the top, he can do a lot through executive order, and his staff is always looking for what they can do. In addition to that, we will see this minimum wage executive order, and just a little bit more on executive orders. They have the full effect of law. They do not require a vote from Congress. They were used in the past in terms of shutting down or setting up Japanese internment camps, national forests, creating a drug-free federal workplace, just some instances. We know that President Obama has signed fewer than 200 executive orders. That puts him behind many modern presidents, such as Bill Clinton or George Bush. So a lot there that he can use, but essentially he has to work with Congress, and he will also talk a lot about that tonight.
What about foreign policy? Last year, President Obama spent time on topics like Iran and even China, but are we expecting some of the same this year?
We are not, Elaine. You know, last year he spent about 10 minutes, and I counted 3 or 4 pages of last year's speech on everything from Syria to Iran to Afghanistan. We are expecting a much smaller portion on foreign policy, despite a lot of major foreign policy accomplishments in 2013. We know that he will address Afghanistan, that he will lightly talk about the NSA reforms that have already been announced. And we also know that he will talk about Syria again. We do expect that he will make some kind of defense of the Iran nuclear deal and call on Congress not to essentially mess that up by passing more sanctions. But essentially 78% of the American people, according to a recent Pew poll, do not want him to talk about foreign policy. They want him to talk about domestic policy. So it seems that the White House is in keeping with that. We also should note that quite a few high-profile people will be in the audience, some of them with the president and with the First Lady, including a couple of marathon bombing victims from that Boston Marathon bombing last spring. There will be a young Latino student who was not deported under another executive order of the president's, which allowed him to stay in the country, even though he did not legally enter the country under a plan that the president announced last year to allow students and those that serve in the military to stay in this country legally. We also know that Kenneth Bae, that Korean-American man who's being held in captivity in North Korea, is also, his family is going to be sitting with a member of Congress from his district, and we hope to catch up with them later tonight.
All right, Jessica Stone live from inside the Capitol.